All right, welcome to another episode. In the last video, a lot of you guys asked about very personal questions regarding relationships, girls, things like that. In this video, I'm gonna be answering most of those questions. Stay tuned. All right, now, first up, let's talk about dating someone inside of medicine versus outside of medicine. So if you're dating someone who is inside of medicine, and you're also inside of medicine, the good thing is that they're gonna understand your level of busyness, the commitments that come with being a medical student or a resident or working in healthcare at large. On the other hand, if you're dating someone outside of medicine, from my experience, that understanding may be a little bit, it doesn't happen as naturally. You may need to be a little more explicit, and even then there can be a little bit of disconnect between work-life balance and what is deemed appropriate versus inappropriate. Now, kind of related to the busyness is your own free time. If you're a medical student or resident, you're not gonna have that much control and say over when your free time is. Let's say you have 1 day per week that you have mostly off, or you may even need to still do a half day. If your partner is outside of medicine, they're generally gonna have more flexibility. They're more likely to also have time off when you have time off. But on the other hand, if both of you are in medicine, then your one sliver of free time may be offset from your partner's sliver of free time, and then there's a bit of a mismatch. So that's not an ideal situation to be in. Now, the other thing to consider when dating someone in versus outside of medicine is things to talk about. If you're both in medicine, it's very common for both of you to just end up talking about medicine most of the time. And that may seem okay initially, but trust me, that's not where you want to be long-term. That will wear you down. If you're dating someone outside of medicine, then they generally have other interests, right? You can teach them a little bit about medicine, but they can hopefully also teach you about other things. Or you may just have other things to talk about because you're living very different lives. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, next part. How to be successful in a relationship in medical school. First, obviously the regular relationship advice applies. So be supportive, mutual trust, mutual understanding, all these things. But in terms of what's unique about a relationship in medical school, first, I think it's super important to have protected time for one another. If you don't do this, you're more likely to just kind of go through the motion. You always have something to study. You're always going to be behind. And then next thing you know, it's been like 3 weeks and you guys haven't actually hung out. You just studied together, had a couple meals together, maybe slept, and that's about it. So what I did and what I suggest is having protected time, let's say once per week. That's what worked for me based on my schedule. And again, this can change on different rotations or you're on your way, etc. But let's say Friday evening. Every Friday evening is like your date night. And that can be going for a movie, that can be cooking together, that can be getting a special meal, that can be doing anything, but it's like protected time for you and your partner. So yeah, gotta have protected time, otherwise you're just gonna go through the motions and the magic, the chemistry is gonna dwindle. Now, kind of tying into the first part, make sure you have things to talk about outside of medicine. Don't just talk about medicine if both of you are in medical school or residency together. That's kind of the natural thing that the conversations will gravitate toward. What I found most helpful for me is actually making a rule. When we go to dinner, or like during this certain time, let's just not talk about medicine, anything but medicine. And chances are the conversation will come back to medicine at a certain point, but then you remind, hey, let's stay away from this. And what I found is that this is very important for your mental health. You don't want your entire life to just be medicine. You are more than just a medical student or a resident or a doctor. You are a person and you have other interests outside, and your partner also has other interests outside. So then the natural question comes up, well, if you're both in medicine and you're both spending most of your time in the hospital, what do you talk about? Let's be real, I'm a massive nerd, love listening to podcasts. My partner likes listening to different podcasts. We talk about our podcasts, or we talk about different things we were learning. I was all about finance and investing at the end of medical school. So I was teaching her different things that I was learning. Whatever it is, whatever your interests are, just dive in, don't talk about medicine. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that oftentimes when you make plans, those plans are gonna have different levels of certainty, and be explicit with that with your partner. So if there is a 20% chance or a 30 or a 40% chance that you may be called in on that Friday night, for example, let them know ahead of time. That's gonna just make your life a lot easier, because otherwise it's natural for someone to assume if you don't show up that you flaked, or that you value your work more, or et cetera, when in reality it could just be that, hey, you're kind of on call, or you may be called in for whatever reason. And if you give them that heads up front that, hey, I'm 100% committed to this, or like, hey, I'm 50% committed because I may be called in, that's gonna make your life a lot easier. You're gonna avoid so many arguments or misunderstandings or hurt feelings. And finally, mutual support. Mutual support is important in any relationship, especially I'd say during your 3rd and 4th year, during your clinical rotations. You're both gonna be challenged. There are different cultures in medical schools in the US. So on the East Coast, it's gonna be a little bit more malignant on average. And these times are gonna be very trying, probably for both of you. There can be days when one or both of you get yelled at by some attending for messing up, or you made a mistake, or you saw your first patient pass away. And it may be hard to do this, right? Because you yourself are gonna be really tested in the hospital, as is your partner, assuming that you guys are going through the same experience at the same time. And it's gonna be extra challenging, but this is where it really counts. This is essentially what makes or breaks the relationship. Next, let's talk about couples matching. So couples matching is where two people, generally in a relationship, want to match together to residency. Now that doesn't necessarily mean you're in the same exact residency program. That's usually the best case scenario. In a normal rank list, you rank your programs, 1 to 10, 1 to 15. And in a couples rank list, you're gonna have different permutations. So ideally you both end up at the same location, but you can also have permutations where you end up at a close by location, let's say the same city or not too far away. The thing that happens is you usually need to compromise, especially if one or both of you are going into something that's very competitive. Then there may be times where it's like, hey, you wanna rank, let's say Stanford #1, but I don't have any programs in the Bay Area. And for that reason, you then have to decide, how are you gonna factor that into your decision making? So for this reason, because of the huge commitment and how much it can influence your actual professional career, couples matching is a huge commitment. And it's not quite getting engaged, but it's like the next thing right below that. So in essence, what couples matching does is it puts a deadline on a relationship, because normally you have time to see how things unfold. But with couples matching, it's like, hey, you know what, by this date, when we submit our rank list, we need to know, are we couples matching or not, and how are we gonna handle that? So it's just kind of a reality of going from medical school to residency if you're in a relationship. Now, if you're both in residency and you're doing long distance, good luck. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it is going to be very, very challenging. Ideally, if only one of you is in residency and the other is not, then hopefully that other person can visit you more often than you can visit them. But if you're both in residency, you can do FaceTime, you can do phone calls, but you're probably not gonna see each other for some period of time, and it's gonna be challenging. Finally, let's talk about starting a family in med school or residency. First of all, I have not started a family, so take this all with a grain of salt. I'm not an expert, these are just my thoughts. What I will say is that based on seeing my friends and colleagues, it's definitely possible, without a doubt. It's not easy though. Here are my thoughts. First, you have to consider the lifestyle of each person's specialty. If you have husband and wife who are both neurosurgeons, that's gonna be very challenging and a very different kind of, family life compared to having two pediatricians or two psychiatrists. So keep that in mind in terms of your own expectations. And you see people that are successful and not successful in terms of relationships in medicine, and specialty could be a contributing factor. Now, if one partner is in medicine and one is not, I have found most commonly, this isn't always the case, but most commonly amongst my friends and colleagues, that one person who's not in medicine usually has a lot more free time to help out with, the newborn, or help cook, or handle other things around the house, when the person who's in medicine is working really long 12, 14, 16-hour days at times. And finally, if you're in medicine, you're gonna be a high wage earner when you're done with residency and when you're living that sweet, sweet attending life. And this is the opportunity to buy your time back. Because when you're in attending, sure, you have a very high income, but it's an active process, right? You are very much trading your time for money. And that's not an ideal situation to be in. As you get busier and as you make more money, the value of each unit of time, whether that's per hour or per day, increases in value. So for that reason, buy back your time with things as simple as household chores. So getting groceries delivered, or having someone clean your house for you, or a gardener. Unless you enjoy doing these things, then by all means do them yourself. But if you don't, buy your time back. The other thing to consider is passive income. Now, don't fall into the trap of thinking that passive income requires no work and you just print money like none other. That would be an ideal situation. And a lot of physicians, if you look at all these physician bloggers, they talk about real estate investments. And there's a lot to real estate investing, whether you want to go super passive with a syndication, or you want to be in the middle with your own property, but a property manager, or you want to just own your property and manage your own property. So there's a lot there. That's not the only way of doing passive income though. But do note, passive income usually requires a lot of upfront work. You're gonna be putting in time to, let's say, make a YouTube channel or start a blog or whatever for sometimes a few years before you can significantly monetize it. So don't think passive income is like easy money. It's more just you put in all the work up front and then there's less work on the tail end. There were some other questions on the Instagram AMA, which was, why am I single? Am I single? When am I getting married? Those questions I may answer in a future video. Much love, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.